Welcome to Doctorates of the Absurd, your provider of belief on demand. So today we're trying to get our heads around this really immense and frankly baffling paradox of modern life.
hmm It's a core contradiction, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, on the one hand, we are living in this era of just radical technological advancement. You think about AI, instant connectivity, all these data systems.
Yeah.
They're all designed for maximum human efficiency and, in theory, safety.
In theory, yes.
And yet somehow, when you look at the social fabric, you look at how people interact, conflict just seems to be intensifying.
It's everywhere.
It feels like it, whether you're talking about huge legal standoffs, these deep cultural wars, or even just, friction in a crowded space, it feels like the dial is permanently set to escalate. So the big question is why? Why are we rushing into this hyper-efficient, technologically optimized future, only to find that the human engine of that system seems more prone to rage and isolation and grievance than ever before?
And that is the crucial, the existential itch we're trying to scratch today. The sources you've pulled together for this deep dive are, they're remarkably diverse.
They seem totally disconnected at first glance.
They do. We're connecting four arenas that you would never normally put in the same sentence.
Right.
So we're talking about the mechanics of crime prediction algorithms,
Right.
the quiet crisis of male mental health,
Okay.
the legal definitions of a common bar fight, and then this fierce global debate over the legality of bullfighting.
And our mission for you, the learner, is to synthesize all of this. We're not just, listing interesting facts from different fields. We're trying to find the universal mechanism of modern conflict.
We're looking for that common friction point, the exact formula, if you will, that turns a small slight, a moment of friction, into a major and often violent crisis.
And we think we've actually found that thread. It's this powerful dynamic that seems to link these external technological systems with our internal emotional warfare.
That's the connection.
So our roadmap for today is this. We'll start by looking at those massive external structures, the ones driven by data and AI that are attempting to sort of optimize away conflict.
Right, the top-down approach.
Exactly. Then we're going to pivot inward. We'll look at maybe the most volatile internal system of all right now, the crisis of identity and aggression that's defining modern manhood.
And then the collision.
And then the collision.
Wow.
We'll see what happens when those two systems crash into each other in the real world. We'll examine the social and legal fallout in everything from bar fights to constitutional court decisions over ancient cultural practices.
So ready to dive into the hidden structures of escalation.
Let's do it. Okay, let's start by unpacking this. This enormous shift in how security and justice actually operate now. The thing that immediately leaps out from the research is this very deliberate elevation of raw information. Data is no longer just a historical record.
No, not at all. It's explicitly described now as a core strategic asset.
And that term, core strategic asset, that's a massive signal, right?
It's a huge signal. It means data is now seen as the fundamental bedrock of modern state efficiency. It's the resource you build everything else on.
And we're seeing it used everywhere.
Everywhere. It's being leveraged for predictive analytics in court systems to try and help manage case outcomes. It's being used for assisted case management, for police to streamline their inquiries, to allocate resources more effectively.
So it's really about using the past to try and engineer a predictable and hopefully a safer future.
That's the goal, a future with fewer surprises. And this real necessity for speed and predictability, it's just tearing down old barriers.
You mean like national borders?
In a data sense, yes. This movement toward what they call interoperability, basically, cross-border data sharing, is accelerating incredibly rapidly.
So what does that look like in practice?
Well, look at initiatives like the EU law enforcement data space. The entire goal there is the seamless, frictionless exchange of information about people, about cargo, across all these different national lines.
It suggests a future where, even if the physical borders are rigid, the data about what crosses them is totally fluid.
That's the vision. And that fluidity is considered paramount, especially when you look at the stakes. Think about this number. Global cybercrime costs are now projected to hit a $10.5 trillion annually.
It's an almost unthinkable number.
It is. And a number like that is the justification for all of this speed, all of this connectivity. It creates the imperative.
It certainly explains it. But, and this is a huge but, that push for maximum data utility runs headfirst into a massive foundational ethical problem. The sources call it the security paradox.
And that paradox is really the tightrope walk of modern governance. It's the central tension.
How so?
Well, on one side of the rope, you have the absolute necessity of maximizing your data usage to improve public safety, to make better decisions. You have to use the data.
But on the other side,
On the other side, you have this non-negotiable requirement of strict compliance with security and privacy standards. So data has to be maximized for its value, while at the same time remaining this fiercely protected, limited resource.
it sounds like a constant trade-off. We're always choosing efficiency over maybe nuance. We want all the benefits of knowing everything, but absolutely none of the risks of that knowledge being misused or falling into the wrong hands.
That's the tension.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's just this constant battle to try and strike that perfect balance, which may not even exist.
So let's dig a bit deeper into how this data is actively reshaping the fundamental mechanics of law enforcement and justice. It's clear we're entering a totally new era of forensics.
It's being defined by convergence. The idea of next-generation forensics is that it blends these advanced physical methods, the stuff you see on TV, with these incredibly powerful virtual ones.
So it's not just about dusting for prints anymore.
Not at all. We're talking about the deep integration of things like generative AI, cloud computing, mobile forensics. So it's no longer about just finding a single fingerprint. It's about connecting that print through algorithms to 1,000 other digital touch points, 1,000 other data points about a person.
And the most visible, and I think maybe the most controversial part of this convergence has to be the leap forward in biometrics. We've moved so far beyond simple identification.
Oh, the scale is just massive now. Let's take facial recognition. As a market, it was valued at nearly $5 billion in 2024, and by the previous year, 2023, over 60% of law enforcement agencies globally were using these systems.
60%, that's a staggering adoption rate.
It is, and then you have the quiet revolution in fingerprint analysis with AFIS, that's the Automated Fingerprint Identification System. There are now over 500 million fingerprint records in these AFIS databases worldwide.
And when you throw AI and machine learning into a system like AFIS, you're not just, archiving prints anymore. You're using that intelligence to connect disparate cases faster. You're reducing the margin for human error, and you're speeding up identification in a way that was impossible a decade ago.
Exactly. But the technology isn't just confined to the crime scene. It's transforming the justice sector itself. We're seeing this massive digitization of the courts, using things like NLP, natural language processing, and predictive analytics just to manage the administrative loads.
The efficiency boost they cite is incredible. AI is projected to reduce administrative court work by something like 40 to 50%.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds like an absolute dream for overworked judges and paralegals.
That's a huge efficiency boost for sure. But that speed has a really surprising social justice implication, too.
How so?
Well, the American Bar Association pointed out that over 80% of low-income Americans simply cannot afford legal representation. It's a huge gap in this system.
A massive gap.
So now you have these platforms emerging, like Donut Pay, that use AI to automate basic legal services. They help people navigate simple legal processes, and in doing so, they're starting to address that critical systemic gap. In this instance, at least, technology is actually democratizing access to the system.
Okay, so this is where the philosophical rubber really meets the road, though. The stakes involved in what the sources call high-risk AI.
Right.
We've seen this massive market acceleration in AI applications for public security. It's expected to grow to nearly $100 billion by 2031. This is where the focus moves from simply processing data to actively predicting human behavior.
This is the frontier, and we have to be really clear about what we mean when we talk about these high-risk use cases.
So let's define them. The first one, and maybe the most socially challenging one, is predictive policing.
Right. So predictive policing involves algorithms that analyze, well, everything. Historical crime reports, social media chatter, behavioral patterns, even data points as simple as the weather.
The weather.
Yeah, the weather. It takes all of that to forecast where and when crime is most likely to occur. Police agencies in the U.S. are using systems like Predpol and HunchLab to try and forecast these high spots and then adjust their patrols accordingly. The goal is to prevent crime before it even happens.
But, and this seems like the obvious flaw, if we're using AI to predict the future based on data from the past, doesn't that tool risk just automating the system's historical biases?
That's the million-dollar question.
I mean, if a community was disproportionately policed 20 years ago and you train an AI on that data, aren't you essentially just programming it to perpetually target that exact same community?
That is the fundamental challenge. The system is designed to identify and reduce risk. But if the data itself defines risk based on things like race or geography or socioeconomic status, then the tool itself becomes a source of grievance.
It stops being a neutral tool.
And it becomes an automated enforcer of a legacy conflict. And this is where our key insight for today, this grievance identity mechanism, starts to become obvious, even in these big external systems. Predictive policing generates identity-based grievance among targeted communities. They feel unfairly profiled, regardless of their individual actions.
That is a heavy trade-off. We're choosing this kind of statistical efficiency over social nuance.
And that leads us right to the second high-risk use case, AI for risk profiling. This uses historical data, travel patterns, behavioral analytics, and it runs it all against databases like Interpol's to predict potential threats.
So things like illegal immigration or drug smuggling.
Exactly. It assesses statistically whether a particular individual poses a risk based on their data profile.
Which is precisely why these powerful applications fall under these high-risk categories and why they require such intense ethical scrutiny, like compliance with the EU AI Act.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The entire focus has to be on accountability. We need what they call explainability, so the ability to show how the AI reached its conclusion. You need human supervision.
Yeah.
And you need rigorous bias detection.
But is that happening?
Well, the research suggests that trust in AI is actually growing. Something like 88% of law enforcement express confidence in its ethical application. But the failure of that accountability, if it happens, risks automating and cementing society's oldest and most dangerous conflicts into our shiny new future.
It's the ultimate example, then, of the external system trying to impose control and safety through data. But that control, it's only as good as the human element it's trying to manage.
Which is never as predictable as the data suggests.
So let's pivot now. Let's go from the system to the person. Let's talk about the internal system, the human engine of conflict, and explore this profound emotional chaos that's resisting all this order, the crisis of modern male identity. So we're shifting now from data optimization to emotional transformation. The research on men's wellness describes this profound transformation that's set against a truly alarming backdrop of crisis.
The scale of the data is, well, it's a silent scream, really. I mean, men die by suicide nearly 4 times more often than women. In the U.S., that accounts for 80% of all suicide.
80%.
But even if you look beyond that tragic end result, the general social health is just deteriorating. Loneliness has become an epidemic. 15% of men now report having no close friendships whatsoever.
And that's a new phenomenon.
It's a 5-fold increase since 1990. A massive, rapid change in social connection.
And the media narratives really reflect this, don't they? We hear constantly about young men who feel profoundly angry, lonely, and friendless, who are falling behind academically, falling behind economically, and who just feel culturally sidelined. It suggests this massive pool of generalized, unresolved emotional distress.
And this is precisely where those traditional masculine norms become a profound barrier to getting better.
The idea of being stoic.
The pressure to be stoic, yeah. To be the independent problem solver, to just man up. It enforces emotional suppression. And this is why only about half of men who are suffering from depression or anxiety ever actually seek professional help.
Because seeking help is seen as a failure of their core identity.
Exactly. If asking for help means you failed at being a man, they'll avoid it at all costs, even if it's destroying them.
And for so many men, that mental distress doesn't even present as the classic signs we associate with depression, like sadness or withdrawal. It comes out sideways.
The symptoms are often disguised, yeah. They tend to manifest as anger or irritability or sometimes just outright aggression. You see a lot of risk-taking behavior.
Like what?
Substance abuse, dangerous driving, gambling. Really, anything used as a coping mechanism or as an attempt to find some kind of stimulation to offset that internal numbness.
So they're trying to feel something.
You're trying to feel anything, and sometimes it translates purely into physical suffering. Unexplained chronic pain, persistent headaches. The internal conflict gets translated into external friction or physical pain, which is often, for them, easier to talk about and address than the emotional root cause.
Which brings us to the battle for male identity that's happening online. This collision of grievance and identity in the digital sphere. You have the manosphere on one side and these positive counter movements on the other.
And the success of the manosphere, led by figures like Andrew Tate, It's not derived from some sophisticated philosophy. It comes from its ability to tap into this very real, very genuine frustration, this deep well of grievance.
So they offer a story for that grievance.
A ready-made narrative, exactly. They take that isolation and that feeling of being culturally sidelined, and they turn it into a kind of moral superiority. They offer this rigid, hypermasculine framework that's very appealing.
And their most effective rhetorical tool, it seems, is this argument about hypocrisy around gender roles.
That's the absolute core of their appeal. They successfully articulate this feeling of a double standard, where society has championed and largely succeeded in abolishing the traditional provider role for women.
Right.
But those provider expectations and all the pressures that come with them remain stubbornly fixed for men.
And when that frustration is dismissed.
When it's dismissed by the mainstream, the manosphere steps right in. They frame that dismissal as proof that the mainstream just doesn't care about men's problems. And that reinforces the feeling of being victimized and, in their eyes, justifies the extreme identity that they promote.
So it's a compelling but really dangerous identity trade-off. You trade your vulnerability, your capacity for genuine connection, for this ready-made community that validates your anger and gives you these clear, rigid rules for how to live.
Absolutely. And the research notes the fallout from this. Many young men are now just choosing disengagement and hedonism. They feel like they can't grind their way into the economic or social success that's required for fulfillment, especially when it comes to dating and partnership.
And the manosphere gives them a simple, if toxic, answer to all that confusion.
It does. But thankfully, there's a positive counter-movement emerging, one that's focused on empathy and vulnerability and resilience.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Well, this movement for what they call positive masculinity is growing. You have these established networks like the Mankind Project that run workshops designed specifically to help men become more emotionally mature, more purposeful.
And there are smaller groups, too.
Yeah, at the same time, you have these grassroots groups like the Here Brotherhood that are creating safe spaces for men to just talk, to discuss trauma and loneliness openly. It's built on an acknowledgement that strength isn't the absence of emotion, but the ability to manage it.
And we can actually track this internal emotional shift through external economic indicators, which is fascinating. Specifically, the global men's personal care market, which is now worth over $90 billion.
That market explosion is highly significant.
Yeah.
Because it's not being driven by the old macho cliches of, smelling good for a date.
Right.
It's being driven largely by younger men from 18 to 34 who explicitly say they are using advanced grooming and skincare routines for confidence and for mood improvement. Self-care is being normalized as a tool for mental wellness, not just for vanity.
And this shift is also happening in physical spaces. We're seeing these classic male touch points evolving into wellness hubs.
The barbershop is the perfect example of this. Historically, it was just a place for a haircut, for superficial grooming. But now they're being recognized as these crucial community wellness touch points.
What do you mean by that?
Some initiatives are actually training barbers in mental health first aid. They're utilizing the unique position of trust that a barber has to normalize conversations about struggle and to facilitate early intervention if someone seems to be in trouble.
So it shifts the burden of seeking help away from the individual.
And it places positive support right within the existing social structure. It makes it easier to ask for help because it's right there in a familiar place.
So, to pull these two sections together, we have the external technological system trying to impose control and peace through predictive data. And at the same time, we have the internal identity system, which is just churning with crisis and anger, where genuine grievance is being weaponized into this rigid, defensive identity.
A storm is brewing.
Exactly. So now let's see what happens when those two volatile forces collide in the social arena, the bar fight. As the research models it, it's actually the perfect sociological experiment. It's not just, random drunken chaos. This theory of coercive actions actually breaks down aggression into these clear, predictable motives.
Absolutely. And understanding these four motives for aggression is really the key to understanding and, more importantly, preventing escalation in these volatile settings.
Okay, so let's walk through them. Let's start with compliance.
Compliance-motivated aggression is all about forcing someone to do something or to stop doing something. This can be anything from staff trying to enforce house rules.
Or breaking up a fight.
Or a patron intervening to break up a fight, which is actually a pro-social act. Unfortunately, it also includes things like unwanted sexual overtures, where an aggressor is trying to force contact.
And the research noted something interesting about that.
It did. It noted critically that staff intervention in those specific sexual incidents is actually very rare.
Uh,
In general, compliance-motivated conflict tends to be pretty mild, but it sets the stage for everything else that follows.
okay, next up is the most immediate trigger, grievance motives.
Right. These are the instant transgressions. Someone bumps into you, a drink gets spilled on you, you feel harassed, or you feel like the staff is treating you unfairly.
And prevention here is pretty straightforward.
It's immediate and practical. Things like reducing bottlenecks in the bar's layout or having a clear house policy to instantly replace a spilled drink. They help restore a quick sense of justice. It stops that initial grievance from festering and turning into something worse.
Which brings us to the third motive, identity. And this circles right back to the crisis of masculinity we were just talking about.
Identity motives are enormously salient, especially among young men. And interestingly, also among security staff who are tasked with maintaining control and projecting an image of authority.
So this is all about honor and image.
It's driven by concerns of honor, image, and this profound cultural need to avoid the humiliating social consequences of publicly refusing any challenge. A bar with alcohol, with perceived slights, with sexual competition in the air, it's a perfect storm for reinforcing a fragile identity.
Okay, and the last one, fun or excitement motives.
This is your low-level stuff. Roughhousing, rough dancing, usually done purely for pleasure. While it's often minor, the danger here is that these incidents can easily provoke a grievance in someone else or accidentally threaten a fragile identity, and then the situation escalates unpredictably.
So here is what seems to be the most critical insight from this entire section, the volatile formula. The really severe violence isn't caused by any one of these motives alone.
No.
It's caused by the direct collision and fusion of grievance and identity.
This is the exact mechanism of escalation. So imagine a spilled drink. It's a genuine grievance.
Yeah.
If that grievance is then dismissed by the person who spilled it, or maybe security staff ignore the victim, the situation immediately shifts.
It's not about the drink anymore.
It's not about the drink anymore. The victim feels overlooked, disrespected, and now their identity, their public image, their honor is threatened. The spilled drink is totally forgotten, and the fight becomes about respect. That immediate collision of grievance and threatened identity is what triggers the most severe, often life-altering violence.
And the intervention strategies that are based on this model are fascinating, especially this idea of encouraging what they call pro-social coercion.
Which is really just an academic term for community de-escalation.
Right.
The current societal norm is that you don't get involved, you let security handle it. But the data shows that recognizing and rewarding patrons who do step in and who use peaceful means to de-escalate, that resulted in decreased aggression 40% of the time.
So shifting the responsibility.
It shifts the responsibility from a security-only model to a community-based approach. It acknowledges that patrons are often the first line of defense, and empowering them to help is crucial.
Okay, so let's move from the sociology of the bar to the cold, hard consequences in the courts. We need to look at the legal definition of this conflict, using Arizona and Colorado law as a framework. The criminal consequences they're shockingly severe.
They range dramatically. I mean, at the lowest end, if you're involved in a loud, chaotic incident, you could be facing misdemeanor assault or disorderly conduct. And that can mean up to 6 months in jail, plus substantial fines.
But the shift to felony status can happen really quickly based on the injury or the tools used.
Aggravated assault is the real threat. If the fight involves any kind of serious bodily injury, and that can mean a broken bone, a laceration that needs stitches, even substantial but temporary disfigurement.
Or a weapon.
Or if a weapon is used, the charge immediately becomes a felony. And depending on the state and the severity, that could mean anywhere from 1.5 to 15 years in prison.
And that's not even counting property damage.
Right. If the fight causes extensive property damage, a criminal damage charge can be filed. That could be a Class 4 felony if the damage goes over $10,000.
So the legal system then has to arbitrate who is responsible in this chaotic, volatile, and often intoxicated situation, which is where these specific legal defenses like mutual combat come into play.
And mutual combat is a very unique, highly nuanced defense. It tries to argue that both parties willingly and knowingly agreed to fight, which would reduce the culpability of the defendant. But, and this is a critical legal subtlety, it requires proof of an antecedent agreement.
What does that actually mean in real terms? It sounds like legal jargon.
It means it has to be a true prior agreement to fight. Simply getting into a spontaneous fistfight after being provoked, or even agreeing to take it outside in the heat of the moment, that doesn't qualify. You have to prove there was a clear-cut, pre-existing agreement to fight, which is often incredibly hard to do in a drunken, chaotic setting.
So if you're just defending yourself, the much clearer legal defense would be self-defense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Self-defense is the standard. It allows for proportional physical force against unlawful force, provided you weren't the one who provoked the use of force with the intent to cause injury. And you can also use defense of others if you intervene to protect a third party.
And what about intoxication? I mean, it's the ubiquitous factor in almost all of these altercations.
Intoxication is generally not a complete defense. You can't just say, I was drunk and walk away. But it could be leveraged in court.
How?
It's used to mitigate the severity of the charge. The argument is that the defendant was so impaired, they lacked the necessary intent, the specific mental state required for the crime. It rarely gets you an acquittal, but it's often used to argue for reduced charges or for alternative sentencing, like mandatory treatment programs. The law is trying to create these very clear lines, but human intention in these identity-driven conflicts is almost always opaque.
Okay, so if the bar fight represents conflict at the social level, our final section examines conflict at its most entrenched level. This is the clash between centuries of cultural tradition and modern ethical frameworks, and it's crystallized in the debate over bullfighting.
This is perhaps the purest distillation of that grievance identity mechanism we've been talking about, but applied to an entire society. On one side, you have the status quo, this powerful defense of cultural identity resisting the modern ethical grievance of animal suffering.
And bullfighting, or la fiesta nacional, is illegal in most of the world now.
It is, yes.
Yeah.
Yet it's fiercely protected as an art form or as cultural heritage in Spain, in parts of France, and in certain Latin American countries.
The identity defense here is really strong. I mean, supporters are citing 400 years of history, the economic engine it represents.
And even the preservation of the Toro de Lidia, the fighting bull breed itself. It's all based on this fundamental anthropocentric view that the bull exists specifically to serve human culture.
A view that stands in direct opposition to the modern ethical shift.
Completely. Opponents argue that culture is not sacrosanct. It's not set in stone. It has to evolve with the society's moral values. From the perspective of modern ethics, the practice violates the imperative against instrumentalizing sentient beings purely for entertainment.
So the argument is that the torture and killing of bulls for human pleasure is, under our contemporary moral values, indefensible.
That's the core of the ethical grievance. And it's easy for us to just say that, but the source material goes a step further by showing how this cruelty is now being scientifically measured. It's moving the debate beyond just an emotional protest.
You're talking about the 5 domains model.
Exactly. They use the 5 domains model to rigorously evaluate animal welfare, specifically in the context of Korean traditional bullfighting, which is a bit different, but the principles apply.
So this is a scientific assessment tool.
Yes, it is. It looks at 5 key areas: nutrition, physical environment, health, behavioral interactions, and crucially, mental state. It takes the subjective claim of cruelty and it makes it quantifiable.
And the findings in this case were pretty unambiguous, weren't they?
They were pervasive and severe welfare compromise across 4 of the 5 domains.
4 out of 5.
Yes. We saw physical environment compromise, where bulls were tethered restrictively on concrete floors. We saw health problems. We saw compromised behavioral interactions. But critically, that mental state domain showed profound indicators of suffering.
What kind of indicators?
Things like excessive salivation, defensive posturing, and repeated frantic escape attempts, all of which point directly to fear, pain, and profound distress. The only domain without major concern was nutrition.
So the science confirms that the grievance is legitimate. And yet the practice persists because of the immense weight of identity. But the societal harm, as the sources point out, extends beyond the animal itself.
Criminological research has highlighted a worrying link between animal violence and broader criminal behavior. Illegal animal fighting often correlates with organized crime, with drug violations, with weapons offenses.
And there's a concern about children watching.
A deep concern. The idea that exposing children to these spectacles of deliberate cruelty erodes their empathy and normalizes aggression. And that's led to policy proposals for things like age restrictions for spectators.
The ultimate legal conundrum reflecting this clash is crystallized in Colombia. The laws there are fundamentally contradictory.
Colombia is trying to serve 2 masters. Its national laws explicitly criminalize animal cruelty. And yet, the National Taurine Statute of 2004 explicitly exempts bullfighting as a culturally rooted tradition.
So the legal system is essentially saying, Cruelty is illegal, except for the culturally sanctioned cruelty that we like.
Precisely. And the judiciary has had to step in repeatedly. The Constitutional Court has recognized animals as sentient beings, and back in 2017, it held that bullfighting was unconstitutional. However, and this is the classic legal punt,
What did they do?
the court postponed the effects of its own decision, it deferred the last word to Congress, and in doing so created this massive legal uncertainty.
That's a perfect example of a societal failure to resolve this grievance identity conflict. The court acknowledged the ethical grievance, but it was unwilling to unilaterally challenge the cultural identity, so it just left the practice in this state of suspended animation.
And this lack of resolution is what leads to the political middle ground, which is now emerging in the form of bloodless bullfighting.
And what does that entail?
This is where the ritual is preserved. The spectacle, the pageantry, the traditional clothing, all of that stays, but the killing is prohibited.
Like they do in Costa Rica or in parts of the U.S.
Exactly. This is the attempt to solve the conflict by saving the identity, the performance, and the tradition, while removing the core ethical grievance, the killing and the torture. It's an acknowledgement of ethical advancement while still trying to respect cultural continuity. And it is perhaps the only real pathway forward in these ancient, entrenched conflicts.
So whether it's an AI trying to optimize human behavior, or men struggling with their own self-definition, or a brawl over a spilled drink, or a centuries-old tradition, the modern world seems to be defined by this tense negotiation between what is entrenched and what should be ethical. Hashtag tag outro. So let's try to synthesize this. Let's find the universal dynamic we found today. Across that external security system, the internal world of male identity, the social friction in a bar, and the cultural battleground of tradition, we really do see the same principle at work over and over again.
The universal clash is this profound pressure to adapt to modern ethics, whether that's data accountability, mental wellness, or animal sentience. And it's meeting the rigid, unyielding resistance of the entrenched status quo. Outdated laws, rigid gender roles, cultural inheritance. When these two forces clash, that's when escalation happens.
And that escalation is rooted in our core finding for today: the grievance identity escalation mechanism. Societal conflicts flare into violence and chaos when legitimate grievances, feeling lonely, being unfairly targeted by police, being physically wronged, witnessing suffering, when those grievances collide with a defensive, rigid threat to a core identity.
And you can see the pattern everywhere once you look for it. The manosphere successfully identifies the genuine grievance of male loneliness, but then it escalates the conflict by framing the solution, emotional vulnerability, as an existential threat to masculine identity itself.
And in the bullfighting debate,
The bullfighting debate minimizes the grievance of suffering because the identity of cultural art form is deemed paramount and unchangeable.
and the practical takeaway from the bar fight research gives us the key to the solution. To prevent the most severe escalation, you have to address the grievance immediately and authentically, without challenging the core identity defensively.
That is the crucial insight for all of us. If we as a society, or even just as individuals, can acknowledge the feeling of being wronged or overlooked or unheard, that genuine grievance, it often diffuses the desperate need for the person or the group to assert their threatened identity through rage or violence. The conflict moves from being an existential battle to being an administrative or a policy issue that can actually be solved.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner, standing on the edge of this technologically accelerating world? The world is racing to implement AI-driven predictive policing and risk profiling using these massive data sets. But if those data sets reflect a history of unexamined grievances, of systemic biases, and violence born from outdated social identities, the aggression of fragile honor, the suppression of emotion, are we simply training our hypermodern tools to automate the preservation of society's most dangerous legacy conflicts? What are you doing in your own life to reconcile the conflicts between your ethical understanding and the cultural inheritance you have been handed?
A vital question for the individual and for the society.
Thank you for joining us for the deep dive. We'll see you next time.